Now, inflation in the UK, we're told, is going to reach 11%. 11%. That figure hasn't been reached since Margaret Thatcher was in power in 1982.
Yeah, as inflation soars, the Bank of England has raised interest rates by 1/4 percentage point to 1.25%. It's the fifth increase we've seen in a row.
Now, the bank is attempting to beat back the tide of inflationary pressures whilst not pulling the rug from under the economy.
Well, let's talk to business and finance commentator Michael Wilson. Michael, morning to you. Look, 11% is a pretty shocking figure after what we've, from what we've seen over the last few decades. What can be done to curb this, if anything?
The problem, and you put it very well in the link, that is the thing, isn't it? How on earth do you stop inflation rising, whereas and trying to prevent a slowdown, which is clearly happening in the economy? That's what has to happen. What can we do about that? Well, I would suggest from a personal point of view that what people should be doing right now is have a proper look at what they're using electricity, for example, in their homes, whether they can actually pool their car journeys together, whether they actually need to make those extra journeys, because it doesn't really matter what these official figures say. It doesn't really matter what we look at what the Bank of England does. 1.25%. I mean, a lot of people would say, well, so what? What difference does that make? 1.25%. That's tiny. Some of us older ones who lived through interest rates of over 20%. And you talked about Margaret Thatcher. That's what it was in 1979 when inflation was absolutely massive. And what her government did was to raise interest rates. It was called monetarism. It was a new word. And this is the only instrument that we have now. And it's a very, very clumsy one indeed. I mean, just looking around at the news this morning, this one slipped me by yesterday, I have to say, but even the central bank in Switzerland raised its interest. When the Swiss start to worry about inflation, then we really do need to worry about it. So I think that what people need to do is have a look at the way they're spending money right now and see what they can cut back on. A survey out this morning is saying that more and more, 8 out of 10 people are cutting back on food, for example. And I don't need to tell your viewers, going down to the petrol station, seeing that fuel price rise every day. It has risen every day, according to the RSC, over at least the past 10 days. What on earth is going on there? So here's what I would suggest. I think what the government needs to do is have a look at the petrol retailers and ask them really whether or not they do need to be putting up prices like this, because the wholesale price of oil, crude, now it's nothing really to do with the pump prices. There's a lot of refining needs to happen before it actually gets in your petrol tank. But looking at the figures now, £103 it now is to fill an average car fuel tank, and £106 for diesel. I mean, these prices are getting to a stage now where the general public will be saying, do you know what? I don't think actually we need to make that journey anymore. That is what economists call demand destruction. In other words, when people say enough's enough, I'm not going to spend any more. I really will cut back on food. I really will cut back on fuel, if it's at all possible. It's very, very different for businesses, but on a personal level, I think that the personal consumers, and we are in a consumer society, should be asking themselves some very serious questions about where they're spending money and whether they need to.